Thank you. Well, good afternoon and welcome everyone to another exciting session, the first session actually of 2022. My name is Roy Magara. I'm an employment solicitor and I work at my own law firm called Magara Law. And I've got the real pleasure of being joined today by Sarah Cale. Sarah, would you like to say your hellos?
Hi, everybody. Nice to meet you all. Well, virtually anyway.
Quite right. Sarah is a guru in all things menopause and runs her own company with all sorts of hints and tips and community networks called Positive Menopause. And Sarah, you'll no doubt talk about that a bit later.
I will
For now,
indeed, yes.
thank you. For now, we're talking about a really important topic and rather ashamed, I think, for myself to say a topic that I really haven't really dived into as much as I ought to have done, given I'm an employment solicitor, until last year. So naughty, really. But I think it really shows actually how little the topic of menopause is talked about. And I think it is such an important topic, not just for men, but for women, for all of us as well, just to really get a good grasp on a natural part of life. So before we dive in, just a few bits of housekeeping. Participation is really, really encouraged by all of you. You're welcome to unmute yourself and chat at any point, or just put something in the chat box. We'll pick it up, completely up to you in terms of how you feel comfortable. Leave your cameras on if you would like to. It's really great to see you. If you don't want to, equally, absolutely fine. So let's talk about menopause. The effects of it are most likely to manifest typically more than I think a lot of us would realize, or at least certainly I realized. Sickness, absence, and performance issues, at least in an employment context. And I think, from my understanding, the link to the menopause may not always be easy to spot, especially as many menopausal women will be reluctant to share this information, and sick notes may not necessarily accurately reflect explicitly something linked to the menopause.
Yeah.
So as awareness in society generally improves, and Sarah will talk about this in just a moment, menopausal women feel much more prepared and empowered to speak up. Equally, number of employment law cases are continuing to rise, which equally needs some work there. Hopefully this discussion will help us all be better equipped and provide adequate support at work and help us all remain mindful rather obligations towards staff. So before I ask you a question, Sarah, I want to ask everyone a question, and that is, and you're welcome to put your thoughts in the chat box, please. Here's the question. How many women between the ages of 45 and 55 who are experiencing the menopause say it has a negative effect on them at work? In percentages. So I'll repeat that. Please put it in the chat box. How many women between the ages of 45 and 55 who are experiencing menopause say it has a negative effect on them at work? Let's see, something 90%, 65, 5%, 75, 100%, 85, 82. All right. Let's see, very low because I don't think it's something we disclose. Great, really broad range actually, although the majority seem to be at the much more higher end. So on one of the studies that I found, it suggested that about 3 in 5, so around 59 to 60% of women between these ages who are experiencing menopausal symptoms say it's got a negative impact on them at work. Although equally, I would suggest that figure may not necessarily be representative because not many women may necessarily disclose it. Sarah, what would you say are some of the common misconceptions about the menopause?
Well, I think that most people assume that when a woman goes into menopause that it is physical. So you can see it from the outside, as you can with pregnancy. Obviously, you know, there is something there, a baby. Everybody says, oh, that lady's pregnant. And when women go into menopause, people automatically assume that you're going to start sweating profusely and go really red and not sleep well. And that's all that they actually think are the symptoms. They don't actually realise that it can affect women mentally far more than they actually assume it does. And I think that You know, it's like when you go to the GP, you go to your GP and you say, I'm feeling like this, I'm feeling tired, I'm feeling run down, I'm feeling low. And you're automatically then told, oh, you're depressed. When in fact, you're not depressed. You're actually of prime menopause age. And therefore, you are in the menopause. And just because you're not having a hot sweat doesn't mean to say that you aren't in menopause. You know, there are over 40 different symptoms, and new symptoms are arising consistently. I mean, I actually discovered one this week that I didn't actually know existed. And because we think that these symptoms are relative to other issues, say thyroid or autoimmune or anything like that, we don't automatically think, oh, it's the menopause. Or we think, I'm too young to be in the menopause. And that's another problem, because we assume that menopause is actually for the 50 plus, when in fact menopause or perimenopause starts around 8 to 10 years before menopause. And all menopause actually means is the last day of your period. So that's what that word means. It just means the last day of your period. So meno, meaning menstrual cycle, pause, meaning end. So you no longer have a menstrual cycle. And they say that you have to have 12 months to the end of that period of time, and then you've finished your menopause. However, some women can actually still spot later on, and that's when you should go and see your GP in case it's another issue. That's another story. Another thing is that people assume that your body actually stops producing estrogen. Although your ovaries stop producing estrogen, you still produce estrogen through testosterone, because testosterone manifests itself in the form of estrogen, and we need estrogen in our bodies to be able to keep our bones strong, our brain strong, and to keep our sanity as well, which is something that, you know, I said previously, women really struggle with when it comes to menopausal symptoms. So, I mean, there are a couple. There are a lot of other things as well, like, you know, people assume that when you're in menopause that you're going to get old and wrinkly and you're just going to wither away in the corner and don't have any quality of life anymore. People assume that HRT is dangerous because of what they've read, because of what they've been told. And in fact, HRT isn't dangerous. It obviously has to come under guidelines, the NICE guidelines, and it has to be administered correctly. But HRT isn't dangerous. In fact, it's beneficial to your health and well-being. So there are just a few misconceptions, and there are many.
I've learned a lot just in that minute or two already, and I'm sure others will have too. Just to encourage anyone, you're welcome to put any thoughts of what we discussed in the chat, or just raise your hand if you want to say something orally, or if you've got questions to ask away. I saw some nods from some of the things that Sarah was saying, and I'm sure others may be thinking something similar. So you're welcome to either direct a question specifically to Sarah or I in the chat, or just to everyone. Is completely up to you. So just picking up on something you just mentioned there, Sarah, and I appreciate this is something that men, I think in particular, may struggle to talk about in the menopause. I think if I speak for myself, it's something which we don't go through. So the reality nonetheless is that we still need to have a good idea about what it's all about. It's a natural part of life. We may have sisters, we all got a mother, grandmothers, etc., but we all work with women in some way, shape or form in the workplace. So how can men be better at this topic in the workplace?
Well, that's a $6 million question, to be honest, because I think, one, it depends on the man. Two, it depends on the sector that you work in. I have a background in construction, and I've worked in construction industry for 35 years. So construction industry is deemed a man's world still. Although that is changing. And so the language that you would use within that industry, or the language that you would use within, say, manufacturing, may be completely different to the language that you would use within the service industry, because everybody talks differently within those environments. And then you can break that down into whether or not you work as director level, or whether or not you're working on a press in a factory. Everybody talks to each other. So I think that what we need to do first and foremost is actually bring the topic of menopause to the forefront so that we are able to talk openly about it. And therefore, once we talk openly about it in the environment, it makes it far easier for men to approach the subject. Because men, unfortunately, are afraid at times to be able to ask a question through fear of actually using the wrong communication in the first instance. I mean, there was a couple of weeks ago, there was a lady in the news, and she'd left her place of work. She was 52 because of the way that she'd been spoken to about the menopause. In fact, outed out, oh, you must be in the menopause in front of clients. Quite clearly, that is not the way to approach the subject. But by saying something with compassion, such as, are you okay? You know, you look a little tired today. Is there anything I could do? Oh, yes, you may be the answer. I didn't sleep very well. I'm going through the menopause. Do you get what I mean? It's just simple, basic language, not being afraid to say something, but not being derogatory in the way that we speak to one another. But I think that educating and understanding in the first instance will really, really help. And then these men can go home, they can talk to their wives, they can talk to their sisters, they can talk to their mothers, and they can have open conversations, and then they will understand more, and that then will be brought back into the workplace.
Really good point. And I think from an employment law perspective, a number of times I get asked, and someone's asked this to me privately in chat box, is whether there's any legislation that covers this at the moment, or whether there could potentially be any legislation that covers this. And I think the simple answer to that at the moment is generally employers are reasonably aware of their obligations, not necessarily to do with the menopause strictly, but at least at something called at a common law level. So generally speaking, there is a duty to provide a safe space, safe working place for their employees so they aren't exposed to unnecessary risk. And that covers both physical and mental risk. And from a statutory point of view, there's the Health and Safety at Work Act and a couple of other regulations that impose duties on employers. However, none of these impose expressly an obligation on employers regarding the menopause. And so to put that into a bit more perspective, there are obligations on employers when women go through pregnancy and or maternity, for example, do with risk assessments, leave, etc. But we haven't got anything expressed at the moment when it comes to the menopause. And you talked about one of the cases that's been through the employment tribunal, which indeed was decided on a few weeks ago. And there are quite a host of tribunal cases at the moment going to that very same thing. Most of these women are bringing their claims with the menopause being a disability, which sounds odd in a sense because menopause is not a disability in and of itself. But in legal speak, under the Equality Act, a disability is a condition which can have a substantial negative effect on your day-to-day, your normal day-to-day activities. And the quirk here is that it's got to last more, or be likely to last at least 12 months. So 12 months or more. And the issue, I suppose, with the menopause is that, I think you mentioned, Sarah, it typically lasts about 12 months, but the symptoms can, of course, range. And that is a potential difficulty for women bringing these sorts of claims, isn't it?
Yeah, it actually can start. I mean, you can have premature menopause whereby 1 in 100 women begin their journey, I like to put it, prior to the age of 40. And in fact, you know, some women forced into menopause through surgical hysterectomy. There was an article, and a young woman didn't even go into puberty, she just went straight into menopause. So I think there's a massive generalisation that, you know, unless you're over the age of 45, which is when GPs actually say that you may well be in menopause, prior to that, they actually want to do blood tests. They're not actually conclusive anyway, because it depends on when they're done in the cycle. that we think that it only happens to a very, happens within a very short period of time, but it actually doesn't. And the fact of the matter is as well, Roy, this affects half of the population in the workforce, and the fastest growing demographic within the workforce are women over the age of 50. Now, do employers really want to lose these women that have accumulated all of these skills over these years, have put so much into the companies that they work for? Because women do, they dedicate themselves to the cause, whether that be their home life, whether that be their work life, and they really put everything in. And then when they're really struggling and they don't have the support, it is soul destroying for them. And having to walk away from a career or a job that they've worked for all of their life with, just handing it back and saying, I can't cope with this anymore. I've got no support. I'm going. One, the financial implication. Two, the pressure then at home. And three, their self-worth. It isn't just about like policies and everything else that companies think that they have to do, which, yes, those may help if they stand up in a court of law. But if they're just shoved in a drawer because they're, crossing all the boxes, then they mean nothing. I think, that it has to go far deeper than that. And we have to start actually thinking about, workplaces are important environments for mental health for a start. And women in menopause are affected so much with their mental health. So can I ask you, Roy,
Yeah.
if a company puts together a policy, and in that policy, they state that they will allow so much time off, say, for women who need to go for appointments, to see their GP, or, they'll allow so much time for lateness if they've got severe insomnia, and then they don't adhere to what they put in those policies. Is there a case then in a court of law?
Sure. The line was a bit patchy there, at least on my side, but I think we're asking if an employer's got policies in place that can assist women in these sorts of scenarios, but then they don't follow through with their policies. Was that your question?
Yeah.
Yeah, great question. So to begin with, not many employers have, for example, a menopause policy in place. But if an employer does, in this instance, then I think it follows through naturally the normal course of what employment law would entail. If the company itself is in breach of its own policies and that has affected an employee in that way, my natural reaction first would be to suggest that employee raise a formal grievance. And if for whatever reason that doesn't go the way it ought to, then appeal that formal grievance. And if for whatever reason, again, the employer doesn't open its eyes to what it ought to be doing, then take legal advice and look to take that further. One of the occupational hazards of my job is that people come to me when they're really exhausted themselves. And I sometimes think to myself, gosh, if only you hadn't waited 2, 3, 4, 5 months when you're now on antidepressants, you're now unwell, you've been off sick for such a long time, you could have saved yourself at least that block of distress. We could have dealt with that sooner. So I'd certainly suggest being proactive about it and have confidence in the rights that you have.
There's just a question come up. Where can we look for advice on what to put in menopause policies? Well, I can help with that, and there are plenty of other people out there who are talking about menopause in the workplace, and that can help with putting together policies. And they don't have to be complicated either. It doesn't have to be like a 20-page document with language that nobody can understand. I mean, it's just basically saying, this is what we're going to do for you, this is what we're going to help you with, and we're going to support you in this. And also, I think, if you think about putting together a policy within your company, then maybe actually talk to the people that are concerned within that policy, rather than just doing something that's generic. Actually getting an input from your employees makes a massive difference to how they see their employer. And that in itself improves communication.
Yeah, quite right. And I'll second the motion on that. And equally, for those companies, indeed, who may not necessarily think should we have a menopause policy? Absolutely do, if you can, and there's a consensus there. Equally, another way to do it is to incorporate the menopause policy elements into other policies, like your sickness and absence policy, for example. Best practice I would always suggest is for employers to include training managerial staff to ensure that they themselves are familiar with the symptoms of the menopause and they're able to deal with those issues appropriately and sensitively. I think, as you highlighted, Sarah, as well, considering adaptations if they need to in terms of workspaces, i.e. ventilation or avenues to get to toilets, etc. Just the ability for employees, women, not to feel so self-conscious, as it were, during this particular time of their lives. So certainly a review of their policies is necessary in any event, as well as a menopause policy.
Yeah, I mean, you've just said there, Roy, about, you know, having the space to be able to go and have a break for 5 or 10 minutes, you know, if you are struggling. Because, I mean, one of the main symptoms, or one of the symptoms that I struggled with, was brain fog and low mood. And so I would double guess everything that I was doing. And yet this is, you know, I'd work for the same company.
Menopause.
For 18 years, I'd worked for the same company. I knew my job, I knew it well, and yet I struggled with everyone's unfrozen. Everyone froze then for a minute. I was on a roll as well.
All right.
I was just saying
that happened, didn't it?
I was just saying that I struggled with brain fog, and I was double guessing everything that I was doing. But I work with figures, so when you're working with figures all day long, you can actually get a bit concerned. Now, I'd write things back to front and all sorts. And I think that having the space to be able to just go away for 5 minutes, take a breather and think, yeah, this is okay, is so important. Because while you're sitting there and you are getting really stressed, really anxious, I mean, panic attacks as well. You know, I've had panic attacks. I've passed out in venues and all sorts. You know, we don't actually realise the impact it can have, but just being able to walk away from a situation and have 5 minutes is so important. And we allow people that smoke to go outside for 10 minutes. So what is the difference with somebody who just wanted to get up from the desk? Why they question?
Right.
Just
Quite
simple
right.
things.
Quite right, I agree.
Yeah.
Having been through the menopause yourself, as you've mentioned, and you've kind of provided us with an example there, are there any examples of how you think your employer could have done better? Not to say they didn't do anything right, but anything they could do better.
I think for me it was a little bit different, because I don't work for a big company, and so therefore the book stopped with the owner of the company that I work for, and who is male. And so discussing the way that I feel in an environment that is very male driven anyway was quite difficult. And so I didn't actually speak about the way that how I felt or what I was going through. I did that internally, you know, it sort of like manifested itself internally to the point where I thought I would explode. And the way that I did something about it was I reached out to other women to see how they were dealing with things and to support them, and vice versa. And that's why I originally started the support group. And I think that that's quite important in companies. I think if you can put together somebody that is quite willing to be a menopause champion, that has a caring heart for others, then that goes a long way with actually instilling sensitivity, really. you
That's a
know,
really good
and
point.
yeah, I think, you know, we can write the policies and it's very important. And like you said, Roy, you know, about women coming to you, they come to you and they're at the end of their tether. A lot of women don't really want to say anything in the first place. In fact, some women don't even want to admit that they're in menopause because they see that, you know, they're getting old, and we live in a society where women are supposed to be all everything and look a certain way and act a certain way, and it's an awful lot of pressure on them. And so feeling like you're not actually doing that well at work, or you're struggling at work, becomes really hard. And so, you know, standing up for yourself is quite tough. And I think that's why it's important to find somebody that can help you, that can stand with you, whether that be going to the GP, whether that be in the workplace. There's a strength in numbers.
Quite right. I'm going to come to some of the questions in the chat box in a moment, but I do want to catch on something you mentioned, which I thought actually was a really good point, because it reminds me that a lot of companies, for example, will have third parties who one can call confidential on a confidential basis if they want some other sort of support, mental health, for example, or otherwise. But and in the context of positive menopause, which is what you started, that can be an external body or support group, as you've mentioned, for companies to say, okay, listen, employees, if you don't want to necessarily go to make it medical per se in the GP or something
Yeah.
like that, here's a support group. Would you like to just talk a little bit about positive menopause and what that's all about? And then I'll go to some of the questions in the chat box, please.
Yeah, obviously positive menopause was started off the back of my own issues with menopause and how I struggled with them. And being a proactive person, I wanted to see if I could actually make a difference. And so I started what was originally a very small Facebook group, and I just reached out to some of my friends. And I think once you start talking about these things, then they will open up as well and tell you how they've been feeling. And before you know it, most of my local ladies in the village actually joined. We've now got 660 members. Off the back of that, I produced the website, which we're consistently putting information out there, not just to do with hormones or the workplace and that, although all of that is on there. There are actually guidelines and helpful information on how to approach your employer as well. We've actually put together something that would help somebody to know what to put in an email, because quite often you don't know what to say. But within the group, we just sort of like pose questions, try to help one another. I've got a dedicated WhatsApp number that ladies can message me if they just need a bit of support, or they want to say, what would you do about this? Or, you know, I don't give medical advice because at the end of the day, I am not medically trained, but I can point them in the right direction because I have links with menopause nurses, doctors, and I can try to help them in that way. And also, I think just knowing that you're in a community of like-minded women that understand makes a massive, massive difference to your own journey. And if you've got somebody else you can go to talk to, because a lot of women struggle as well at home in relationships, talking about the way that they feel. But if they've got somebody they can go to and they can say, look, this is quite normal, I'm feeling like this at home, I don't know what to do. I mean, I know I'm going off a bit here, but, you know, if there's relationship problems, they say, what do you think? Do you feel like this as well? Is this normal? Like, you know, before it can go down the road of divorce or something. And they, you know, other people can pull them back and say, yeah, I feel like that. That's quite normal. Why don't you try this? And I think having that there makes a big difference. And because of that community, we're putting together a big Galentine's event in February to get a load of local ladies together. And we're going to be doing a lot more of that this coming year, as well as going out into the workplace and as well as hopefully doing events just for men, so that, you know, men can say or ask whatever they want without women being there and without the fear of saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing, you know, just so we can get it out in the open a bit more. So
Yeah,
yes, so that's what we do. Yeah,
that's super. Thank you. I'll share the link to your website, if that's okay, in the chat box as well for people to have a click onto that. Okay, let's go through some of the questions in the chat. If anyone wants to use this opportunity to raise your hand or ask a question too, we'll do that and then we'll crack on. But for now, I'll just look in the chat box. So someone's asked, Also, are there ways for employers to foster a helpful environment in the workplace, the same way a breastfeeding woman should have facilities to express or safely store milk? Would you like to tackle that one first, Sarah?
Yeah, I think that if there doesn't have to be anything that in particular, just a quiet space, really, somewhere that because they say that CBT, like cognitive behavioural therapy, is really helpful for women, as is just sitting quietly with your own thoughts. So if they only have to provide somewhere that's maybe a little bit cool with a water cooler. That they can go and just sit, or if there's somewhere there that there's some information, some leaflets, just being able to do things like that for employees can, make a big difference. It doesn't have to be anything. And also another thing is uniforms. Tesco's actually have produced uniforms for women who are in menopause.
Mm.
So if they find that the normal nylon, whatever they're made out of, fabric is creating problems for them, they can go and say, can I have one of those new uniforms? So it's looking at things like that as well that can make a difference. Change it. I mean, we've all worked from home, and at home people will work in whatever they want, and the whole day of having to go to work, in like a three-piece suit or whatever, I think is changing. And so I think that women should be allowed to wear things that are helping their body regulate its heat and its temperature. Just simple things. Ask women what they want. Ask them.
Really good points. Thank you. I'll tag on my answer with the next question, which is, what can we do to create a more belonging, inclusive understanding in the workplace? I'll sort of break it down into some headings or subheadings. Foster a positive environment which treats the issue of menopause as sensitively and positively as possible, and give you women that strong platform that they need to have that kind of discussion openly and positively. Secondly, offer training for line managers, because line managers are human beings as well, whether they're woman or man. We don't know everything, so it's important not to assume either way. Your line manager could be a man and be quite clued up on the menopause, or equally the other way around. Likewise, your line manager could be a woman, but not necessarily as clued up on the menopause for one reason or another. So as an employer, or if you're in HR, for example, promote that training within your workplaces for your line managers. Again, work on. Was someone going to say something?
Sorry, that was me.
Okay. Yes.
I was just going to say also, Wellbeing of Women have a workplace pledge. So maybe get your company to sign up to their workplace pledge, which is actually on their website. They're doing it in conjunction with Hello Magazine. I was fortunate to be part of the roundtable event, so there were a lot of big companies that are getting involved in that. So, I think that it'd be great to follow suit regardless of the size of the company or how many employees they are. Everyone matters. Doesn't have to be a big corporation. So sign up to that. I think that's a positive thing to do.
Yeah, quite right. I concur. If you're able to, Sarah, can you leave the link for that in the chat box as well for people to have an easy site to that?
Will
give you some homework. Thank you. So just to complete that question, creating appropriate policies, as we've discussed earlier as well. I won't repeat that, but hopefully you can recall what we talked about there. Someone else asked about reasonable adjustments. Yeah, indeed. So in the context of the menopause and reasonable adjustments, that's where it can be argued that from a disability point of view under the Equality Act, that's going to last more than those 12 months. And businesses will then have an obligation to make reasonable adjustments for their employees. Say for the things that we've talked about already, which businesses ought to start having anyway, in terms of that room with good ventilation, etc., or space to clear their heads. A reasonable adjustment could be if a woman needs to go for an appointment with her GP to discuss HRT or otherwise, or is going through a sickness absence and needs more time off, for example. A reasonable adjustment, hopefully it's quite obvious if not already, but a reasonable adjustment quite simply is to allow that employee to go for that appointment, to have that extra time off. And hopefully that answers your question there. If it doesn't, feel free to whack something else in the chat and let me know.
I think also,
sorry, yes.
You know, if we can change the hours of work, so you could do maybe job share as well, maybe look at that, or you could accumulate so many hours and then you can take time off when needed. And you know, there's change that, I mean, obviously it's more difficult dependent on what department those individuals work in, but I do think that there are other things that could be implemented, which obviously as well, when you're at work, you're far more productive if you've had a good night's sleep. And, you know, the retentions of companies are benefited by their employees actually, you know, feeling well, positive and energized when they go to work, rather than feeling tired, exhausted and demotivated. So
quite right. Yes. So next question. Someone's asked, can women who are living with perimenopause or menopause request flexible working, and should this legally be considered by the employer if business needs can accommodate? Well, I'll come to you, Sarah, in just a moment for your thoughts on that. From an employment law point of view, yes, certainly. From a flexible working point of view, at the moment, the law is that a business is legally obligated to consider the flexible working request. A business is not legally obligated to allow a flexible working request. And I hope that makes sense. They're legally obligated to consider that. That doesn't therefore equal that they will accept that working request. But suffice to say, if there is a clear case that the business can accommodate that flexible working request, for example, to bring in what you talked about, Sarah, about changing hours or job share, for example, well, then why not? Ultimately, it's better to retain your staff, these great members of staff, than to have a high attrition rate in that sense. Anything else you want to add to that, Sarah?
Not really. I think that obviously, you know, companies may think, well, if we're going to do a job share, then it's going to cost us money to advertise for the other person and all of that, you know. But ultimately, if the individual woman struggles that much and then leaves, then you're going to have to pay that out anyway, and it's probably actually going to cost more money, because the current employee could help train the person that's going to be doing the job sharing, whereas if they up and leave, who's going to train them then? So I think it's looking at the wider picture rather than just focusing on one aspect of it, you know, and how all of that then benefits everybody else around and not just the individual concerned.
Yeah, I hear you, which leads on to a good point that someone else has raised, and I'll pass this on to you, Sarah, for comments. Someone said, I guess if a female manager has had a good experience of menopause, they may not appreciate the different, more challenging experiences of their colleagues. What do you say to that?
I would say that I've come across some ladies who have said, oh, my menopause has been amazing. And quite clearly they are still in menopause, because when you spend a lot of time with ladies that are going through the menopause, you get to spot a lot of the signs, and because they haven't had like the hot sweats or anything else, and it may just be that they're angry a lot of the time, then they just see that it's everybody else's fault, it's not theirs, and they're not actually going through menopause, or their menopause was that easy that it wasn't a problem. So then they don't really have empathy for other individuals. You know, I mean, women can go through menopause and not really have any symptoms. And they too are, the lady that I was talking about earlier to somebody else, she actually worked for the Chief of Police Commissioners, and she worked there for 15 years. Then she went to work for the Financial Ombudsman. She had 300 staff, and then she went to work for another very large company, and she was forced into having hysterectomy, so she went straight into menopause. Her manager was female and was really horrible to her, and her story is on Wellbeing of Women if you want to read that. And she left a really, really good job because it destroyed her. So I don't think that we can naturally assume that women are going to understand any more than some men in that case.
Thank you. Thank you. Really good points. Last one on the chat, at least for now, is can an employer ask the person if they are using any form of hormonal support? As someone who's been through the menopause, Sarah, and you speak about this generally, what would your answer be to that question?
I think it's how that question is approached. If you are asked, well, if you're on HRT, there shouldn't be anything wrong with you, you know, you need to get on with it. I don't know what you're complaining about. Or if you are asked, have you been to anybody about this? You know, is there anything I can do, like any information I could find out for you? I mean, has anybody talked to you maybe about HRT? It's the way that you approach it, it's the wording that you use that makes a massive difference. One, to the response you're going to get, and two, obviously, to, you know, the workplace yet again. It's like any relationship, isn't it? I mean, you know, we underestimate workplace relationships, but a lot of the time we spend 8 hours a day with those people. We spend more time there than we do at home. And so I think that, you know, when approaching somebody, maybe think about how you would ask your friend or how you would ask a member of your family, and would you use the same wording if it was somebody that you were close to rather than somebody that you worked with? Shouldn't be any different.
Yeah, quite right. And hopefully that answers your question, the person who asked that. Before we continue, would anyone like to unmute themselves and speak to anything we've discussed? Question, comment, complaint, or otherwise? No pressure though. Recently been said that more than 1 million UK women could quit their jobs through lack of menopausal support. So what should we, all of us here, anyone who watches this webinar, bar the last 2 minutes or so, what should we be doing to prevent this stat?
I think generally talking about it, first of all, bringing open conversations in the workplace, maybe discussing that you've been on this event, some of the things that you've learned, talking to your colleagues. They don't have to be women that are in menopause, they can be anybody. You know, young women need to be aware of this, because at some point in their life they're going to reach that stage as well. And I think that the more that we talk about it, the easier it's going to be for them, and it'll just be another occurrence like everything else that women go through in their lives. I think, and maybe pinpointing certain people that could help put together policies, looking at the environment, maybe calling together a small meeting of ladies that want to be involved, asking them what they think, what they would like to see, where they would like to see change. Just listening to what they say, documenting it, and then putting together proposals, having an open door policy. You know, saying if anybody wants to come and talk to us about anything, then there's not going to be any judgment, and we're here to listen, like there should with anything within the workplace, not just menopause. And I think that would be a really good starting point. And the more companies that do that, it's going to make a huge difference. I mean, there's already been a big change since I started my group 6 years ago. I mean, they're talking about it on television now. You know, there's new documentaries. I'm talking at the moment to a television, I can't think of the word for it, without saying what they are, television channel, about a new series that's coming out later on this year, looking at women's health. And it's a 4-part series, and one of the areas they're going to be looking at is menopause. They're going to be talking to real women about menopause and how it affects them. So I think just talking about it, giving women a voice, because going and seeing your GP and not being heard is hard enough, and then having to go to work and not being heard is hard. Not being heard at home, because let's face it, not all relationships are sympathetic either way. You know, I can remember my daughter saying to me, "Why do you look so sad, Mum? You always look so sad." And it affects your home. So if it's affecting your home, it's affecting your work. And so if we can all make a difference, just a small one. And I'll just go on. So I'm just going to
No, that's fantastic. I've noticed, speaking about things at home, and you may tag along to this, tag on to the person I'm about to ask this, Sarah, too. But I noticed that we've got a nutritionist in the group as well, Louise Lewis, and she's all about this kind of life as well. So, Louise, hello there. If you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself, and maybe just, do you know of, or could you advise of any nutritional nuggets for women in their menopause?
Yeah, so I mean, we can't go into a whole session on nutrition today, but just related to what you have been talking about, which has been really, really interesting. So I'm a nutritionist, but I specialize in women with stress and burnout. That's my thing, my area, which I see a lot of perimenopause women in my clinic coming with the stress and the burnout, and with the hormonal imbalances coming up and all of that stuff, the sleep and the brain fog. But what I was thinking about in relation to workplace is time for lunch breaks, time out for eating, because I'm coming from the point of view of nourishing the body with the nutrients that it needs to help some of these symptoms that are coming up. But if you're not having that time out to have a lunch break, to get that nourishing food, when I was in my corporate life, people, most of the women would have their lunch at their desk, they would eat a sandwich, or they would say, oh, I haven't had lunch yet. And I'd be thinking it's 4 p.m. Because they're back-to-back meetings. So they don't have that time out to even go and get a nourishing meal because they're so stressed with work. So I think in terms of workplaces, that is so important. It's different, I suppose, now that we're working at home. But even so, if you're on back-to-back Zoom calls all day and you're just eating a sandwich for lunch, that's just going to exacerbate the symptoms that you might be experiencing with menopause, perimenopause. Two of the key things I'm always striving for women like this, it's blood sugar balance is so important, and supporting the adrenals, because when the estrogen is decreasing, the adrenals are going to take over some of that production of estrogen. And if the adrenals aren't supported because you're stressed and burnt out and you're not balancing your blood sugar, then it's just going to make things worse. So those are the kind of two key things that I'm always aiming for, balancing the hormones. And if we can support that through the workplace with proper breaks and appreciating that people need to go and have those breaks, get a drink of water, have 5 minutes away from their desk, is so, so important. And I think what you're doing, Sarah, is really amazing. I think that's such an amazing support for women, that they can come and have that support from you and your group is fantastic.
Thank you. You were saying, Louise, about having a break. I think also it's, with meetings, how sort of like board meetings and things like that, and women go into them and they're boiling hot, like they're having to sit there in their corporate clothes, but also being able to get up and go to the toilet, without somebody saying, oh, where are you off to? Not going to the toilet again, are you? Because women do actually suffer, a lot of women with, far more incontinence when they go through the menopause, and it not being questioned. So I think it's just having a little bit of compassion and understanding, but also for women, like you were saying about nutrition and that, for women to actually look into what's important for them, what they need to help keep their levels balanced, so they feel well, having valuing who they are as well, exactly. is important.
And valuing that nourishment, just not seeing food as fuel to get through the workday, and not seeing it as I've got to have this caffeine to get through the day because I've got this really early meeting and then I've got a late meeting or whatever, and I just need to eat this sandwich because I just need something because I've only got 10 minutes between meetings. Like seeing it more as nourishment that can support these processes and support your hormones is, that's a better way to come at it. But you need your working day to support that, because if you don't actually have the time to have that nourishment and make those meals, then that's a problem, isn't it? If you don't have that time.
Somebody's just mentioned about vitamin D and about, that's so important in menopause, as is magnesium, and we could talk you know, because I love nutrition, I did a nutritional course like a few years back, having an autoimmune disorder as well. It's really important to me, you know, that I eat and I train. So yeah, vitamin D, magnesium, salmon, you know, really good fish is really important as well. I think getting all the right nutrients into the body makes, you know, a huge difference.
And it's also to support the other processes, because there's all the other stuff going on with menopause where we've got to think about heart health and bone health, because of the change in the hormones can affect the other elements of your health. So it's recognizing that and getting it, you know, getting your vitamin D tested. You don't want to just supplement with any old amount. You've got to get that tested to see what your level is. But if you don't know those things, then you know, you're not empowered to take that action.
Yeah, totally. So maybe workforces as well need to look at what women can do as well to help themselves, and not just, you know, what GPs can do to help them, but they can provide other sources of information, also for the wellness of the other employees as well, and not just women that are in menopause.
Access to other, I mean, it depends on the workplace, doesn't it, and their budget and all that, but access to other therapists, you know, whether that's nutrition or CBT, talking therapy, whatever it is, access to that kind of therapy would be amazing for women of all stages, whatever they're going through.
Really great points. Thank you so much, Louise, for sharing your insight.
It's been really interesting. Thank you.
Quite right. Yes, thank you. Conscious of time, we've got about 4 or 5 minutes left. Anything from anyone else in terms of comments or questions or otherwise? You're welcome to unmute yourself again, or just whack something in the chat box. No, absolutely fine. Sarah, what would you have to say in closing for our discussion?
Oh gosh, what would I say in closing? I'd like to say thank you all for listening to me. I could talk forever, but if you want any more information, or if you want to connect with me directly, Roy will have all of that for you, won't you, Roy? Or you can see my little, it's there, yeah. Like that, I can work out then, like mirror image. You can check me out online, and, you know, connect with me via email, or my WhatsApp's on there, or there's a direct chat box on there if you'd like any more information about the workplace, or if you have any friends that are struggling with menopause, then please send them in my direction, because the more we all stand together, the better this will be.
Yeah, quite right. Really, really sage points there, Sarah. Thank you. And likewise, from me, I've learned a lot in this session, never mind my own research and our own conversations before this, Sarah. So I can but thank you very much for your insight. Thank you to everyone for your questions and thoughts. Thank you to Louise for your